China has problems, serious problems. Well, no, they're not the kinds of problems that could threaten Xi Jinping's rule in the near term. They could, however, set the stage for greater problems in his future further down the road if left unresolved. These issues range from economic problems to foreign policy problems, to say nothing of the widespread surge in COVID cases after 2 years of strict zero-COVID policy. For us to fully understand not only the speed at which these crises have struck and their impact, as well as how Xi Jinping may feel about these issues, we need to take a look at the man himself, Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, son of complicated communist leader Xi Jinping, knows a thing or two about political survival. In 1969, Xi Jinping would be sent to the agricultural commune in Shanxi province for the next 6 years. His father, one of the key figures that helped the Communist Party succeed during the Civil War, had crossed the line again. This time, he would be sent to jail, with his son sent to exile. It was here in Shanxi that Xi Jinping would become close to the Chinese lower class, and in 1974 would himself become a member of the Communist Party. While his father would eventually find freedom once again and find his footing within the party, Xi Jinping would work from position to position around China, gaining credibility and, more importantly, not making the same mistakes as his father. He was careful to carry the party line and not make too much noise. This steady work would gain him prestige and trust within the party, and in 1999 he would become the governor of Fujian, and then in 2007 would become the party secretary in Shanghai. Later that year, he would be voted in as a member of the elite political bureau, or Politburo, considered one of the elite groups of the CCP. His consistent rise up the ladder and towing of the party line led in 2010 to his naming as the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, a powerful posting where he would eventually become chair when President Hu Jintao passed the position to Xi. In 2013, Xi Jinping would become president. Now at the top, Xi began to cement his rule and ensure the survival of the party for the future. Xi Jinping quickly began a sweeping anti-corruption campaign that would eventually punish over 1 million officials, from high-level politicians to low-level civil servants, on corruption charges from bribery to abuse of power. This campaign had a dual effect, not only in improving the CCP's image to the domestic audience from one of corruption to one more legitimate, it would also see many of Xi Jinping's rivals removed, effectively boosting Xi Jinping's levels of support inside the party. Xi wouldn't stop there. He would also bring the implementation and institutionalization of what has become known as Xi Jinping thought, also known as socialism with Chinese characteristics. This unique interpretation of socialism would include what's known as one country, two systems, in which mainland China maintains a communist centrally managed economy, while cities like Macau and Hong Kong would be granted economic liberties that would not be allowed throughout the rest of the Chinese economy. Xi would cement his hold on power, abolishing term limits and establishing himself as a political driver within the Communist Party unseen since Mao Zedong. What made Xi Jinping gain the attention of the world, however, was his foreign policy. From the assertion of the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, to the resurgence of tensions with Taiwan, to the use of the Belt and Road Initiative to enhance China's image globally through economic and infrastructure projects, China was showing the signs of becoming a global superpower. Among his key allies was Russian President Vladimir Putin, who shared a distrust of the West, and specifically the United States, and wished to establish what he would refer to as the multipolar world order. This was not just advantageous for Russia, it was advantageous for China, and Xi Jinping would ensure that Russia and China would become close allies throughout his presidency. This would endure hardships, from the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian War in 2014 to the Russian intervention in Syria to the close economic relationship Russia has with India, which stood at odds with China over a territorial dispute in Ladakh. That said, Xi Jinping was prepared to make China a force to be reckoned with, and he believed he had the formula to make it happen. He would emphasize this point by encouraging rapid military modernization and growth, shifting the People's Liberation Army or PLA's force structure from its mirror of the Soviet model to resemble that of Western militaries. This would be reinforced with the commissioning of China's first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, in 2012, and then China's first domestically produced carrier, the Shandong, in 2017. With a strong army, Xi was determined to build a strong navy that could project power into the sea and ensure regional hegemony beyond China's coastline and to the first island chain. With an economy growing faster than the speed of light and a military modernizing at a dizzying rate, Xi Jinping's efforts would make him one of the most popular leaders in China. All of this would take a huge blow, however, in 2020, when a small outbreak in Wuhan would turn the country's fortunes upside down. Xi Jinping, relative to the rest of the world, took an extremely cautious approach to the pandemic. He may have been concerned about China's aging population and its comparative size to other age groups, or it could have been a number of other perfectly explainable reasons. His policy would be dubbed the Zero COVID policy. The name of the policy explains its intent. There was to be zero outbreaks of COVID inside the borders of China. To enforce this, Xi enabled the internal police and Chinese CDC to forcibly lock entire apartment buildings in their home, shutting down entire cities and enforcing widespread censorship to ensure the Chinese people complied. These tools were not new and had been in routine use prior to the pandemic, but Xi believed that they would be necessary now more than ever to keep the virus from spreading while avoiding the inevitable outcry that would come from prolonged shutdowns, while other countries either remained open or would endure short shutdowns before reopening. Xi's position would be further challenged when he would be approached by his friend Vladimir Putin about his desire to invade the rest of Ukraine. Xi knew that this would ultimately impact China, though it would open opportunities for China as well. He would give Putin his blessing, though he would request that he waited until the conclusion of the Winter Olympics, which were being held at the time in China. When the war finally began, Xi Jinping would become the most interested third party in the war. Throughout 2022, Xi Jinping would have to lean on his survival skills. He'd managed to outlive his family lineage to a politically controversial father, and would climb his way to the top of the food chain. Still, despite all his work to this point, he would face both domestic and international pressure that he had yet to feel. The Russian invasion of Ukraine would become a disaster. What he was assured by Putin would be a 10-day special military operation became a year-long affair with no end in sight. Worse, his closest and most powerful ally would have its military forces blunted against a relentless Ukrainian defense. This troubled Xi, as he had hoped for a swift Russian victory in Ukraine that would spell good luck in a potential future campaign against Taiwan. He'd gone through the trouble of voicing his intent to resolve the Taiwan question in the near future, and the precedent that Russia set with Ukraine would help inform China on its planning around Taiwan. That the war would become a prolonged quagmire, costing over 100,000 Russian lives and turning Russia into a pariah state, discouraged Xi from moving forward with his plans, at least for now. To make matters worse, the rest of the world had effectively moved on from COVID, while China maintained a zero COVID stance. This began to wear on the Chinese people and would eventually lead to massive nationwide protests against lockdowns and censorship. Protests against lockdowns were one thing, but the thing Xi feared most were the protests against his rule as president, with some protesters openly calling for his resignation. Xi, not wanting to let matters worsen, would end the zero COVID policy. And while the protests would die down, the next challenge would immediately begin with fresh COVID cases surging throughout China. Since China had been careful to not allow the spread of COVID, there wasn't much in terms of herd immunity to the different variants. As COVID cases spiked, so too did hospitalizations. Xi Jinping now faces several crises that may only get worse as time goes on. From an economy that's beginning to slow down as a result of everything from zero COVID to the current outbreak to the collapse of Evergrande to other domestic economic issues bubbling under the surface, the key benefit that the party has offered its people, economic prosperity, is beginning to unwind. What's worse, China faces pressure from outside its borders as well. Xi has yet to come up with an answer to the Taiwan question. While Taiwan and the West have seen the defense of Ukraine as a glimpse of how Taiwan could disrupt or defend against the Chinese invasion, China has seen it as a tale of caution against how it should actually pursue Taiwan. Xi also needs to decide on his answer on whose side he's on over Ukraine. While he has issued vocal support for his friend Vladimir Putin, he hasn't gone as far as to provide any kind of military aid. There also may be limits to this support. All of this, from the domestic and economic issues to the foreign policy concerns, are happening incredibly quickly for China. And for the CCP, there is little patience to let problems drag out. While there are few in the party who stand as challengers to Xi Jinping, the desire for the party does still mirror the desire for Xi Jinping. Get back on track, fast. Xi Jinping is a survivor, but he hasn't had to survive anything like this so far. While he is unlikely to face any great challenges to his rule in the near term, he still needs to come up with answers to China's growing list of problems. He's going to have to do it with a slower and more volatile economy and without any help from his biggest ally. And paradoxically, while he figures these challenges out, he only grants one of his largest foreign policy foes exactly what they need: time.